Okay, if people have any questions, and also people who have been involved with this group want to come up, and we can try and field some of those questions together. David?
Two coal power plants, one in Niagara County, I believe you said, and also one in Tonawanda. Niagara Falls produces a lot of power. How come these guys have coal power plants, despite the fact that the hydropower of Niagara Falls?
So the question was essentially, given the hydro production from Niagara Falls, why do we still have the coal-fired power plants online? Is that correct? Right. Okay. So can you all hear me? Okay. So hydro, of the renewable energy portfolio in New York State, it is predominantly coming from hydropower. There are just inherent limitations to how much power that can produce. And I think we're currently at a maximum because though hydro, particularly with Niagara Falls, because it's just naturally running down, it's a great energy source, but there's not a lot of opportunity to currently expand that. There will be, if you can get the transmission upgrades online, there will be more power coming off that's available to go onto the system. But we're not currently advocating for a lot more hydropower just because they tend to involve dams and a lot of other environmental impacts. So I think that it's really an issue of an aging infrastructure in New York State. It's not a very efficient system. And the fact that almost all of the power is coming, it's a west to east transition, so the bulk of the power is produced here, and Niagara Falls couldn't possibly support the entire state. So you kind of have a mix of energy upstate. Does that answer your question?
Sort of, but I didn't know that they were using all that was actually produced, and I thought there was also stuff available from Canada. You know, they split the amount of water withdrawn.
The hydro line from
between
Canada?
Canada and the United States, and I thought Canada had a surplus if the United States didn't.
I'm not an expert on that one. My understanding is that the hydro line they're talking about from Canada will involve new large-scale hydro production, so there are going to be significant environmental impacts from it. If you get me your contact information, I can connect you with someone who knows a lot more about that issue than I do.
I'm going to use the mic.
Hi. Thank you, Sam and Jennifer, for presenting all this information. Very useful. I have two questions. One is, you mentioned, and I've read a zillion places already, some from you folks and some from a lot of other places, that the transmission line upgrades that NYSEG is proposing will be needed in any case. I have yet to be able to, and I can understand how that indeed can be the case. And certainly in the long term, we need to improve the smart grid in the country considerably, although there's a lot of problems with doing that that have nothing to do with this and won't be overcome by this. But I'm wondering what the source for that information is that they'll be needed anyway, and when will they be needed?
So, yeah, the source for that is NYSO, which is the New York State or New York Independent Service Operators or some systems operators, and they did a report that NYSEG cited in one of their transmission proposal, which I think it was like on page 19, kind of a little technical, but basically the State Street transmission line will have to be upgraded at some point. I was reading through the public comments on this case, and actually someone who in the 90s was a NYSEG worker said that they considered doing that and they didn't have the money then to do those upgrades. So we're going to be paying for those upgrades no matter what. So that's a true piece of information.
So to finish up this first question, then it would certainly seem that if indeed that's a validated fact that they're going to be upgraded anyway at sometime in the near future, then why would anyone, and that's, according to NYSEG, that's all that's needed to meet the requirements of why this power plant would be repowered. Why would anyone consider repowering the power plants when you have a much less expensive option that's going to have to be done anyway?
So our response to that, and you'll probably get a different response from Energy or the bondholders of AES, is the fact that these companies were recently in bankruptcy and they have to make money back to pay people off. So their proposals are not so much, they're not putting their own money into this. It'd be a different case if they thought, hey, this is the right way to go. We believe this so much, we're going to put our own money into it. They're asking you to fund this project so that they can offset their losses that came through the bankruptcies.
All right, that's understandable, but of course, this is not private enterprise. This is a publicly regulated industry, and as such, anything that gets approved gets paid for by the ratepayers and not by the investors.
In New York State, that's true.
In New York State with the PSC,
but
yes.
NRG, the company that owns Dunkirk, is actually a very profitable company, and they are making millions and millions of dollars in clean energy investments in other places. So they have money to
Right.
put into the plant if they felt it was a good investment.
Okay, thank you. My second question is a shorter one, and that is, I'm from the town of Dryden, and I've spent the last couple of days working on writing up a comment and a resolution from the town board in the town. And one of the issues that's important to Dryden, although not necessarily the only important thing by any means, is this issue of if the gas-fired repowering were to go through, it will require a new pipeline extension. And as you said, Sam, from Freeville, meaning it goes through the town of Dryden into Lansing. I've also heard as late as today, and I thought from you in one email today also, that was actually not a valid assumption anymore, that was actually misrepresentation in some reporting somewhere.
Yeah,
Can you clear me up on that at all?
Yeah. So the deal with the pipeline, initially there was a report, I think it was in the Ithaca Journal, sometime this winter, that there would be a pipeline through, like coming from Dryden, from the Ellis Hollow place right there. So that, I think that my understanding is that the line now is actually going to be coming from Freeville in Cortland. I don't think it would be going through Dryden.
Freeville is in the town of Dryden.
Oh, okay, then.
Freeville is in the middle of the town of Dryden, just
Okay, well,
about. And
clearly
so
I don't.
a significant portion of this 18-mile, not the whole thing by any means, but a significant portion of it will be in the town of Dryden.
Okay.
If it's coming from Freeville.
Yeah.
If, on the other hand, it's coming from Homer Cortland area, none of it would be in the town of Dryden, and that's just as a Dryden resident, I'm interested in that issue. I'm wondering how we get some clarity on this.
Yeah, I mean, I can look more into it. I think these questions, it came up actually when Jerry Goodenow was giving his presentation to the Environmental Management Council, the Tompkins County Environmental Management Council, and people asked about this pipeline. He was there with someone from NYSEG, and they also seemed to be like, they were kind of waffling on what the situation is. So it's unclear. It's somewhere in the documents. The documents are heavily redacted, the Cayuga power plant proposal, so it's actually really hard to find specific information, which is a deliberate strategy. And if you go on the Public Service Commission, lawyers from the Sierra Club have been very exasperated trying to find answers. But I think it's an answerable question, and we can look into it. And
Okay, thank you.
Carol? Oh, you can.
I had a question about, I guess NYSEG and PSC is asking the public to weigh in on this, but they're not giving us the total amount of information we need to really make a decision. For example, the prices, when things will be finished, the price of the pipeline. That's going to be, who's going to pay for that? I assume this is all going to come back on ratepayers eventually, and not the bondholders. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's definitely all being paid for by ratepayers, and you're like totally right that there's not a lot of information. It's a lot of the information that we've been getting about the specifics have really been coming out in the last like couple of weeks just by people like Joe Wilson from the Dryden Resource Awareness Council, like doing a lot of reading through these documents, calling people up, calling reporters. There's also, like, for example, the tax arguments that are being used. Those seem to be maybe written by Cayuga operating companies. So, like, the arguments that are here are not arguments that are based on sort of publicly available information where everything's sort of on the table. And it's really kind of hard to figure out. But I think what we know now, which I just presented to you, really does present a pretty damning case for the repowering proposal. But I totally agree. There should be more public information. Like, people can call up the Cayuga power plant and ask them to give them the unredacted copy. Like, they're probably not going to do that, but a lot of the information is redacted there. So like the cost of the pipelines, where that cost is coming from, when this power plant would come online, what would happen to the Lansing tax base in the interim between when the plant's taken off. Like there might be a point where there's actually no taxes for Lansing. So there's like a whole slew of questions that are not really being answered. You know, you can go to the Public Service Commission's website and look through the documents, but they're really technical. And so, yeah, I think we're going to try and make all the information we find pretty publicly available through the Shaleshock website, through documents that we have posted on Scribd that I can go back to and have the link, and I'll send this around and put it on the Shaleshock website afterwards so people can access information we have. But I think you're totally right that there's not.
It makes me wonder if this isn't just a sham public hearing, that they are going to make the decision based on information that we will never see.
Yeah, the thing that makes, I think, me think it's not a sham public hearing is that NYSEG is on our side, which, you know, when you have a major utility company saying, you know, this is not cost effective for us, we don't think we should be doing it, and then you have the New York State Business Council also, you know, weighing in on our side. It's not sort of a David versus Goliath battle, I think. It's actually just, it's sort of, they're looking at both sides because both sides have really, really strong arguments for them that have, you know, both, you know, environmentalists who might get ignored often, but also people who have maybe bigger pots of money to throw around on our side here too.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes. No, I was going to say a few things. Hi, I'm Carol Chalk from the county legislature. On the question about is this process, is there really a political part of the process? From reading through the documents, what it looks like to me is that if the decision were going to be made purely on the technical information, there's most of the technical information there from NYSEG, from the ISO, it would favor the transmission line option. There's a public part of the process that we're in now so that additional factors can be taken into account. So I think that the answer is it is political at this point, and there's the chance for the community that doesn't want to see the plant to close to come out and say, here's why it shouldn't close. I want to say a word about pipelines. This is just my sense from working on the natural gas stuff that we have. In any of the production, it doesn't seem that pipelines are cited until the rest of the infrastructure is in place, or certainly they're not announced as to where they're going. Jerry, at the county's Economic Development Committee meeting, said that there were two options for where it would go. One would be through Dryden, and the other was down from the north, from Auburn. I just wanted to correct a couple of just small points in there, or just update. I'm looking at the figures about the taxes, and there are two figures that have been out in the public. One, that the school district and the plant are saying that the funds are about 10 or 11% of their budget, and this one that Sam found that is showing something less, 5.6. And my conjecture on that one, and I don't know for sure, is that budgets have to do with 6.5%, whatever the percent is. There's a difference between the percent of your total budget, which includes money from the state and maybe feds, and the percent of the local tax portion of the budget. So that may account for the difference in those figures for anybody who's wondering. And yes, that's correct? Okay, good. So that clears up that mystery that was floating around. And then I want to talk about the $5.7 billion energy highway plan that Sam was quoting. Just a small correction, but it just, we should get our facts right. The entire highway plan is 5.7 billion. I had a figure out there that I misremembered in my earlier speech that was not correct. It's 5.7 billion. There are basically 4 lanes on this highway, of which somewhere between 1 and 2 billion is the repowering part of the plan. So if you subtract 1 to 2, 1.5 from the 5.7, we still got over $4 billion. So if you're citing a figure, how much of the energy highway would be available for other kinds of energy development, it's something over $4 billion. The 4 lanes on that highway seem to be, as I recall, it was repowering is one of them, transmission upgrades is a whole section, clean energy is renewable energy is a section, and then I forget the 4th one was something like renewal or rebuilding aging infrastructure. So those are the 4 lanes, and I understand that this process is about picking between 2 options, but I just can't imagine building for the future without mentioning renewable and without saying we'd like that renewable to be produced here. So, I'm going to be saying that in my comments, and I understand our comments can't focus on that, but I think it's important for us to ask to be part of the future, not the past. That's my own view.
Yeah, thank you for those updates. You can definitely, in your comments, say that you're kind of appalled by the scope of this and that you think that there should be renewables. And another thing about just those numbers, I think it's telling that a lot of the numbers Jerry's been using and promoting are really misleading. So, for example, he gave a presentation to the Environmental Management Council in which he talked about the percentage of time that the power plant's been online. And then, so he's shown in previous years, it's like 10%, 9% of the time. And then this year, it's 83% of the time. What he didn't show is the fact that one was taking into account both turbines and the other was taking into account one, and one happened prior to the reliability service agreement and one happened after. So like a lot of the numbers that are going around in this debate, it's not, all the cards aren't on the table. So, it's not surprising that when they're getting $30 million more a year, they're able to, burn more coal. That's just another example of one of these, both are factual, but you just have to sort of cite where you're getting it from. And the $26 million Lansing School District budget was from there. That was the total budget for 2013. 6.5% is from pilot.
2 questions from your presentation. One is, this statement was made that power coming into the area wouldn't be from gas, would be from wind. And I just want to know what the basis of that is. And the second question has to do with the pilot payments, the payment in lieu of taxes. And why is it they're going down? Because usually it's the other way. All right, I guess some of it has to be that they're not making their obligations, but I just would like clarifications on those 2 points.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about in terms of the energy, if you have the transmission system upgrades, the energy that can come online to offset needs, FERC regulations prioritize wind. There are wind projects in the area. There are a lot more that are in the queue to be built and more who want to come online after that. So it's a priority issue, and the fact that that's how the Federal Energy Regulatory Committee has decided, or Commission has decided that they want to prioritize projects. So it gives an incentive for wind development to take place. My understanding of why the pilot payments are decreasing is because the plant has become less and less profitable, so they're saying that they can afford to pay less into the community. And that is the case across all 4 plants that we've looked at that currently have pilot payments. They're all significantly decreasing, and the decrease of the projections we've seen going about 3 years out are a lot lower than you would expect them to be. That's our understanding of it anyways.
Did you have the correction? Well, I think some people ought to actually go to the source. Martha Robertson, chair of the Tompkins County Legislature and chair of the IDA, which negotiated the pilot a number of years ago. And if you go back to that the graph, the plant was making money before shale gas came online. It's directly related, the loss of income in the plant is directly related to being undercut by shale gas. So when people, separate conversation when anybody wants to think about what's the economic benefit, cost and benefit of shale gas. Well, here's a direct loss to an existing industry. Aside from whatever you want to say about the environmental impact, the payment in lieu of taxes is taxes. Those are payments that they make. They have been meeting their obligations. The negotiation was not, the payment in lieu of tax agreements that we usually think of are abatements to encourage new industrial development, or in our case also downtown development. And it's true, the abatements level, drop off over the years, and the industry getting the abatement pays more and more taxes as the years go by. This was a different kind of agreement, only taken because you can't, it's not simple to evaluate, to set a proper assessment for a power plant. It's not like you've got comparables. It's not like a 3-bedroom house on one street is similar to another 3-bedroom house, which is what property assessments are basically about. This was a negotiated agreement where we looked at all the costs and the income of the plant. We were allowed to see proprietary information. It was a very hard-fought negotiation, and we renegotiated several times. So this is something that the Industrial Development Agency has done over a period of years together with the Lansing School District and the town of Lansing and Tompkins County. So it's not a matter of giving any sort of abatement on taxes. It was literally to establish a proper and accurate value for the plant based on the income that it receives, based on its profit. The profit's been going down. It's been tanking because low price of gas, coal isn't competitive below $4. So now, one of the issues here that people ought to be very aware of is that to the extent that New York starts depending on natural gas, and I think you were right, Sam, about the export terminals, that's, I think, the biggest danger to New York as an economic argument.
I have a just short question for you, Martha, about the payment in lieu of taxes. So from 1955 to 2003, they just paid taxes. And then why at that point did how you tax utility, like generating plants change?
We got tired of going to court every year. We got tired of fighting it out in court. Which is what we did. We spent thousands and thousands of dollars in court, and we thought we could do a better job setting a value than a judge who really would say, well, you say it's this, they say it's that, split it down the middle. And we took many, many weeks and months to understand the industry, to understand the pressures on them, and that was just, both sides really wanted to avoid going to court.
Thank you.
Then Sarah. Okay. I'm still thinking about the criteria that you've been talking about for our comments, and I was reading the paper about the Dunkirk meeting, and it seemed like from the newspaper's accounts, most of the people were talking about the fact that the schools were going to take a huge hit and they were going to lose a lot of teachers and the employment aspects. So what kind of scope of review, or what internally does the PSC have to look at, and what guidelines do they have? So if they're looking at purely political factors, Is that just because they want to look at political factors, or do they have some leeway in the criteria that they use, for instance, economic impact on the community? And second question is, if the agency decides that they want to go with the repowering, is there recourse above that? What can anyone do about that decision?
So PSC does have, I think, 3 main criteria in which they're going to decide on. Rates is the primary one. So impact to ratepayers is one, and then overall energy demand is another. Impacts to community is a part of the equation, but from our understanding of the way PSC makes decisions, they're primarily driven by what energy is actually needed and is on the system and the impact to ratepayers. One of the things that I think is actually, I mean, obviously we are supporting the transition and not the repowering. So one of the things I think is working in our benefit is the fact that a lot of arguments being made for repowering have nothing to do with the scope of the PSC and have absolutely nothing to do with energy infrastructure issues in New York State. So that's one of the reasons we're asking folks to stay fairly narrow on your comments and then bring in your other issues. There's certainly it's valid that the PSC is deciding this very narrowly and that there should be other clean energy investment up here, but we think that this is a way for us to help make a stronger argument if we actually stick to their own internal criteria. If they decide to go with repowering, we've been asked by several groups that represent low-income communities what happens in terms of a rate case after that. There is likely to be a rate case because there will be a significant increase. However, our calculus has shown that if the PSC makes this decision knowing there will be significant rate increase, they're unlikely to be swayed at that process. So really our best chance to actually interfere and to make our voices heard is at this stage and not a later stage. Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
I just want to make sure that I understand. Sam, you said that New York State has a surplus of energy without the coal-fired plant. So with the upgrade of the transmission lines, energy supplied by New York State from other sources would meet the need. Is that right?
Yeah, so because there have been like a loss of manufacturing jobs in New York State and just sort of various changes, also just because there already was a lot of electricity, there is a surplus right now, but there's not a way to get that surplus moved from where it is being produced to where it needs to go. So that's why transmission upgrades.
So upgrading the transmission lines would supply the need, and the amount of tax base that is being put into subsidizing the power plant. Why is government not allowing like some kind of referendum of taxpayers to say, well, this money that we're subsidizing the power plant with, why don't we give it to the school district in this transition time to allow them to stabilize while we meet the need, while we go through this transition? And nobody wants the education system to fall apart, and I feel like it's a complete twist of the argument to say, okay, if you don't want this coal plant, you want to kill education in Lansing. So why is that not a part of the argument?
Yeah, I think that it's a political question about ratepayers paying stuff versus taxpayers. But I think it's good to note that if we paid $370 million, that could pay Lansing's current payment in lieu of taxes for the next 200 years. So that's kind of
so who in government do we talk to, in local government, to push this issue? Because that is the debate being controlled by the power plant and the power suppliers as opposed to the real issues.
PSC has no authority to work on that issue. They can only work on ratepayer issues, and ratepayers cannot be asked to pay for school districts.
Yeah, that's correct. So that's a simple answer, but I think if we were looking at this more comprehensively, I think your point stands that.
Not as part of this area.
Yeah.
Just in terms of.
Put somewhere in your documentation the references that say that we can reference to that there is adequate energy in New York State pre-fracking, that we're okay with energy. We do not need this plant for energy.
Can you supply that reference material? So
Yeah, that reference is going to be it's already in this PowerPoint, and I'm going to go through and more adequately cite everything so everyone has all the information.
And just in terms of the political question of who can you go to actually advocate for a community to get transition assistance, I think you have a completely amazing state assemblywoman. So I talked with Barbara Lifton's office, and I would talk with anybody who has influence or a roadway to Cuomo. That could be through the county legislature, through city councils, it can be through state representatives. I would also recommend trying to get a union collaboration as well as an economic development collaboration together to do a joint letter to Cuomo or other things. Because that is not within the scope of the PSC, but that doesn't mean we can't simultaneously be pushing for that and for the clean renewable energy investments that will ultimately offset the long-term job loss.
I'm from Niles, and I'm completely new to this issue, and I'm confused. So I'm going to ask a really simple question, and maybe you can help me out. What you've argued, I think, is that you could say there are two main reasons for not repurposing this plant. One is the health, environmental kinds of issues, and the other are the economic issues, that it's going to cost taxpayers and others significantly more money. So if I'm arguing on the other side for the repurposing of this plant, I have to have some way of responding to those claims. And it seems to me logically there are two things I can say. One, I can deny one or both of those claims. I can say, no, there are no significant environmental impacts, or no, your taxes aren't going to go up. Assuming I don't do that, what are the arguments on the other? I mean, what people on the other side would have to do is say, if they concede that both of those things are going to happen, what they would have to say is, yes, but the benefits of doing this will outweigh them. And could you, I know you've alluded to this, but could you just, in 25 words or less, tell me what are the benefits that are supposed to outweigh?
Yeah, so a lot of this debate locally has been framed by proponents of repowering, like Jerry Goodenow. They've kind of done two things. One, or he's really just he's done two things. One is he has made it sound like it's natural gas versus coal, which is not true. And they've made it sound like natural gas is better than coal, which it's just not, that's also not true. So on the environmental argument, it's weak, but they're just kind of playing this line of clean burning natural gas, which I think people acquainted with fracking know is a total sort of like false argument. On the economic argument, they're really focusing on the local impacts to Lansing and enlisting the support of the Lansing School District. And I think this is unfortunate on several fronts. One is that, it is true that this plant is paying, under $2 million a year to the Lansing Central School Districts, which is, a part of their budget, and they will have to make cuts if they lose that money. But, again, the question is, there are also other ways they could get this money if the Lansing School District wasn't turning to, this ally in the power plant, but actually turning to the community and saying, how can we do this? And I think that's a conversation we need to be having, and I think, hopefully, and then, so I think really that's the way they've been doing it. They've been playing, jobs are going to be hurt at the plant, we're going to lose those jobs, and the Lansing tax base is going to be hurt. And then they've also just been not talking about the rate hikes. Jerry Goodenow does not talk about rate hikes at all. And if he's pressured, he actually said when someone asked him at the Environmental Management Council what percentage would come from rate hikes, he said he didn't know and made it, he really downplayed that. And he also didn't mention the $370 million that ratepayers might have to pay, and he didn't mention the $30 million they're already paying. So they're kind of not talking about the economic arguments, bringing up this other economic argument that is kind of weak already, and then, so that's kind of how they're arguing right now. And yeah.
So one other argument you might hear is that natural gas is a good bridge fuel because it powers up more quickly, so you can use it intermittently while you get wind or solar online. We are rejecting that argument because in the same period of time it will take to build the plant, you can actually get renewable energy infrastructure up to scale. So it's not an either or question. And the fact of the matter is, because the environmental impacts are so significant, we're better off using these cheaper, because we don't need this power. So we're better off doing the transmission fixes, some efficiency, and then bringing renewable energy up to scale. And it's not, they're kind of presenting a false choice and mislabeling their argument as environmental when it's really just an economic argument to make money back for their bondholders.
I'd like to have a better understanding of the relationship between the PSC, NYSEG, and this particular plant. Is NYSEG under any obligation to buy from this plant? If they can buy cheaper, could they just say to this plant, you know, we think we don't need you, and so we just won't buy energy from you? And does the PSC, you know, I know that the plant went to the PSC, I think, to ask for permission to mothball, not to NYSEG. But anyway, I'm just confused about the relationships.
Yeah, the plant said we want to close. It's the mothballing order. And NYSEG said then the next step legally is that PSC goes to NYSEG and says, NYSEG, can you provide sufficient power reliably without this plant? And NYSEG said, no, we need the plant. So the $30 million that everybody talks about, there's something called ICAP, installed capacity payments, that the independent system operator pays to all the plants that they have operating, so that even if they're not needed today, tomorrow it might be 90 degrees and they might be needed tomorrow. So they pay the plants basically, you know, baseline amount to keep them open. That's installed capacity, so that they are ready to fire up if we need them. Essentially, the $30 million agreement was negotiated because the plant said, well, NYSEG, you need us to stay open, you know, then you need to, you know, essentially pay the installed capacity charge. So in return, the plant is returning to NYSEG up to $15 million of the ICAP payments it was getting. So in a sense, the ratepayers took over from the ICAP payments from NYSO, and the plant is paying that back. So the net is about 15 million, not 30, and it's only a one-year agreement. It's not an ongoing agreement. It's just to get them through this year while PSC made a decision. So if there were no mothballing, if there were no, you know, no order from NYSEG saying that they wanted to keep the plant open, we would be paying anyway. It's part of the structure of electricity in the state, that it's a public good, that the capacity exists even if we don't need it all the time. That's the ICAP system. So it's not, I mean, I think what's important to say is that yet NYSEG is the transmitter from this plant, and that's the provider. It's, that's the relationship, and you know, NYSEG asked the plant to stay open.
So just to kind of recap, in the interim before either transmission or repowering can happen, the plant has to stay open because during peak hours, Auburn would experience blackouts, so like on rare summer days. Currently, NYSEG doesn't have, they are selling their electricity on the open market, which is why they're not economically competitive. So NYSEG is under no obligation to buy from them, even though they're under an obligation to help keep them open. So that's actually, that's my understanding. And I think that's how, you know, that's why they were only operating at 10% of the time, because if they were operating more than that, then they wouldn't be able to sell it onto the open market. And that would be the same for natural gas. So if natural gas prices did go up, NYSEG would not have to buy it from them, and then they might have to mothball that facility as well.
Hi, my name's Betsy Kiyokowski, and I find some conflicting information here. I mean, I think that when you're saying that NYSEG says there's plenty of electric, but yet we need it for peak situations. I mean, peak situations do justify keeping a plant open. And natural gas is an ideal fuel for peak situations. There's nothing else that can be started up so quickly at such short notice. But I think that what I don't understand is, as this lady and the other gentleman were alluding to, is what the relationship is between this company and the PSC. I mean, the PSC is making the decision. Why would they say yes?
So just the first part of that, the excess that NYSO reported, also the Sierra Club hired an independent energy expert. They also reported this. NYSEG also has been citing NYSO, saying that there's more energy. That energy is just in New York State. Locally, the transmission lines aren't enough to get that energy to Auburn during those hours. So that's why they need the transmission upgrades. Otherwise, so, we could build the natural gas power plant and they could continue to provide it, or we could do these transmission upgrades and that would meet the energy need. And building the transmission upgrades, we wouldn't need to power up really quickly the natural gas plant. We would just start buying our energy from further away during those peak hours. So does that make sense?
You still haven't said why PSC would say yes.
Oh, okay, that's the second part of your question. Do you want to answer the second part? Or?
Yeah, I mean, based on the technical knowledge that our lawyers have from the independent consultants, a lot of which is unfortunately redacted, we don't see any reason why on the merits of the case PSC would rule in favor of the AES proposal.
So the likelihood is that they will say no.
If it is a purely technical decision and our information is accurate, that is what we would project, yes.
Well, do you think NYSEG is just covering its ass, so to speak, by saying, we want this company available if we run out of electric power on peak situations?
Well, there are federal and state mandates that have to do with how much power you need and where it needs to be available, and the actual projected peaks are way over real peaks, except for like 2 days a year. So it's not NYSEG who's making that decision, it's FERC and it's PSC and it's other Department of Energy and other places within New York State and the federal government who actually give those mandates.
And NYSEG's official report on this issue said, we need this plant operating until we can do these transmission upgrades, but they're strongly in favor of the transmission upgrades over the repowering. So, it's not a matter of the coal plant staying open or not, because it just has to close because of the cost of the plant. So, do you feel?
Did you answer Chris's question about I think he was looking for some kind of proof that there was solar capacity coming online to equal all of these, presumably all of the plants around that are getting mothballed, and there's more than that. We just lost one in Binghamton too. Where's the proof that amount of solar is coming online? Did you answer that? I'm sorry if I missed it.
So our argument was not that solar is coming online to offset that. Excuse me?
Well, I think you said wind. Whatever, renewables, solar and wind.
So sorry if I misstated anything, or this gets a little complicated. So the argument for why this plant can come offline is that there is currently enough power within the system as is to bring both Dunkirk and Cayuga offline with the proper transmission system upgrades. The issue comes in if you're going to do more than that and you're going to bring the Somerset and Tonawanda plant and Indian Point offline, then where does that power come in? My claim for renewables was based on FERC regulations that state that the first energy in the queue that could come on new transmission lines is going to be wind and renewable sources.
Okay, so I didn't hear, all right, so one other question. What is the proposed output of the gas plant? I'm guessing it's on the order of 100 to 500 megawatts, something like that? Is it? Okay. Yeah. So I want somebody, let's say there's 10 of these plants shutting down. Where do we have 300 times 10 megawatts of wind coming online? I just don't see it. So I fundamentally challenge the assertion that we do have enough power. My understanding, if I might, is that we have been for the last 30 years pushing our grid to the limits. And this time of year is the time of year when we start seeing rolling blackouts happening all over the country. Why do we see? And sometimes we see really catastrophic blackouts that'll take out the whole East Coast. And the reason is because we are maxed out. July and August, we are pushing everything to the real limits. And the other thing is, I just took an airplane ride yesterday and over Susquehanna County, PA. And what I'll tell you is, I mean, anybody that's arguing for transmission line improvements, you really should pay attention to what are the environmental impacts of transmission lines. Because I'll give you one example, just because this is something I happen to know, because I just did the calculation. Constitution Pipeline, when it comes through, it's going to clear 1,100 football fields. 1,100 football fields. These transmission line, and also there's transmission line losses, whether you're talking about natural gas transmission lines or electric transmission lines. And when you advocate for transmission lines, you're advocating for industrialized power. We're switching from one kind of industrialized power to a different kind of industrialized power. And there are solar experts like Dr. Gay Kanoff of Endicott that says the real solution is local, distributed. I think it was somebody, Martha, I think was talking about, we really need to talk about replacing it. We need to, it's like, this frame that we've been given, it's like, do you want chemotherapy or do you want surgery? It's kind of a false dichotomy. It's like there's got to be, let's break out of that box. We have to demand if we have a democracy, let's demand these local, renewable alternatives, and not, because otherwise we're going to be inviting the accusation of NIMBYism that, oh yeah, when you say transmission lines, you're saying, I don't care whether, I think it's nuke, it's coal, and when you're asking for, and these gas-fired electric plants, when we say we want increased transmission line, we're saying we want this nasty energy that we don't want here someplace else. That's just classic NIMBYism.
Yeah, so just like a couple of points about that. So I agree with you that ultimately what I want, I definitely want local distributed power. A couple of issues with that, like when it's really sunny in one place and not sunny in another place, you need transmission lines to get it. So currently, Ithaca or like the surrounding area has, Cornell has a proposed solar farm. There's the proposed Black Oak wind farm. Solarized Tompkins is putting in a lot of distributed solar. There's a lot of renewables coming online that are both distributed and like larger projects. So there is stuff going online. Second of all, the choice we've been given by the Public Service Commission is this choice between transmission line upgrades, which would, there right now is a surplus of power, and it's not, that's just what the people who are legally required to come up, that's just the case.
Let's talk offline. You're going to have to prove to me that there's a surplus of power. There might be a surplus in non-peak times. There might be a surplus of capacity. But basically, we've got a serious power problem, and we need to address it with, Richard Heinberg says power down. One of his books is called Power Down. We've got a decreased demand because we've got a rising human population. We're running out of these big, the easy power is really going offline. And do we want to replace it with more industrialized power? I'm talking, Gabe Knuff says what she thinks is everybody has photovoltaics on their house. That's the distributed kind of power. It's not wind farms, it's big solar farms. It's not more big industrial power. And suffering transmission line environmental impacts and transmission line losses is really low. I know this isn't on the table yet, but we got to expand the conversation from this narrow frame we're being given.
Let me just, I know that there's a few other people who want to get some questions or statements in before we go, but let me just address a few things there. No one is disagreeing with that we've been presented with a false choice here. And I don't think anybody in my organization or your organization would say that we are against distributed power. What we're saying is in this one particular situation, the lesser of two evils is X. And let's be clear, all energy has a footprint. Whether it's a wind turbine, whether it's a transmission system, whether it's a coal plant, whether it's an LNG terminal, our energy needs always have an impact on our environment. That's just something that we have to live with. In terms of specific amounts of wind that are in the queue, there are 1,800 megawatts that are currently just waiting for final siting approval to go through. There are 1,800 other megawatts that are pretty close to that process in the queue. And our experts have determined that we think that there's an additional 2,000 megawatts of wind that is available throughout upstate New York and onshore potential. And then we're advocating for 2,500 megawatts of offshore wind potential, specifically in Long Island, but that could eventually come to the Great Lakes as well. So there is an actual New York State wind farm energy queue that we can give you, and I also encourage you to read the 2012 NYSO Gold Book that we've been referring to in terms of where these numbers are coming from. But you're right, the frame is broken, nobody's gonna argue that, and we all wanna see communities benefiting from distributed solar, and also we need to immediately address the dire climate disruption implications and pollution that's coming from existing plants now, and unfortunately, the best way to do that is through utility scale power. And we should feel free to have that conversation offline, but I know other folks might have some things they want to get to before we close up the night.
Okay, my name is Kathy Russell. I'm with the Tompkins County Workers Coalition, and I'm wondering, you sort of said something about the Sierra Club and labor. Yes. One of the issues that really speaks to our community is, of course, the one that speaks to everybody across the country: jobs, jobs, jobs. I saw online on the email list something about how the fracking industry said, well, it's going to be 240,000 jobs, and then the anti-frackers did an analysis, we got that down to, well, maybe 3,000, but only for a while. And so I'm wondering what the Sierra Club is doing to work with the labor movement, because it's tragic that the labor movement is not more powerful than it is, but that is really, like, in terms of community labor alliances, which is what the Workers Center is, So what is your thinking about that?
So we have a report out called Jobs Beyond Coal, which I'm happy to give you, which is I'll summarize it, but it's a very long document that cites 3 to 4 specific examples of the Sierra Club sitting down with labor in Washington State, in Colorado, and in Connecticut, I believe, are the primary examples, where we've worked together and come to the table and advocated for a common solution. We are in the beginning processes of doing this in New York State, and Dunkirk, it got a little away from us just because the PSC hearing came up so fast, and it's such a visceral issue there. I have very high hopes for sitting down with organized labor here, and I'm hoping that anyone in this room who has connections that can help bring folks to the table to have that conversation, let's do it, because this does not have to be an adversarial thing. This is another one of the false choices we've been given by major energy conglomerates, and we just have to reject that. But I will provide you this report that gives you specific information, and I think that there's definitely some concrete solutions that we can hammer out together. And thank you for bringing that up.
I'd like to just ask Adam, why do you seem to think NYSEG isn't in the business of making money? Why do you think it's only Jared Goodnow that has a business interest? No. Let me finish. I think it's important to recognize that when NYSEG was asked to comment on the plant's proposals, they have an inherent conflict of interest. It's, do you want to give, the question to NYSEG was, do you want to give the business to somebody else, or do you want the business yourself? I mean, really? That's the question. So I think we should all start out whatever we say at that hearing with what an insanely narrow choice this is. I mean, this makes no sense whatsoever. And the plant was asked to propose up to 4 possibilities, and they were told what to propose, basically, and said, tell us what A, B, C, and D would cost. They didn't have any choice. And, I honestly, I've worked with Jerry a long time. I'm working right now on a proposal to keep this open as a coal plant and co-fire with renewables, which would actually be the quickest transition. It would, I think, be the lowest cost transition. It would save save the tax base and the jobs, save and actually increase the supply chain and therefore the market statewide, and even testing, becoming a real experiment and a laboratory for the best kinds of renewables that could be used in this plant, and hoping eventually to wind down off of coal altogether. Because I agree completely, gas is worse than coal. And the problem is we have a lot of people to convince, including, by the way, the National Sierra Club, that gas is worse for the climate than coal. So if you believe that, which I do, then the better choice is to do the best we can with a coal plant. So I want to know why you think NYSEG is not in the business to make money.
Okay, so I'll just address the NYSEG and the advocacy for coal. So NYSEG looked at this and came up with transmission upgrades. That's what they were tasked to do, just the same way that Cayuga Power Producers was tasked to do that. Their proposal, and I'm not saying that they're neutral. They're obviously in it to make money, but you can't be neutral on a moving train. Everyone in this has a position some way or another. And also when the Sierra Club hired their own independent energy consultants who were able to get confidential information and review everything, the Sierra Club also sided with the NYSEG proposal. So this isn't, while NYSEG might have some vested interest, they did cite the effects on ratepayers. I mean, you can read the report. It was the effects on ratepayers that they were worried about. It was the uncertainty of the price of gas. They laid out a pretty transparent argument for why transmission upgrades. So that's part A. Part B is your advocacy of coal. So this coal plant is killing people every year. People in Appalachia are dying from mountaintop removal. And you've already talked. Martha, please be quiet. Let me say what I'm saying. Physicians, scientists, and engineers, which has many of the most prominent local and national scientists, has come out and issued a statement on this, saying that they don't think this plant should remain open as a coal-fired power plant or a natural gas plant. The Sierra Club. Basically most of the local environmental groups, all the prominent people. And I think to advocate burning coal at a time when we could just stop burning everything altogether, and when coal is not profitable. And that's just the case. It's not, and we can talk about it afterwards, but I think that proposal is just bad for community health, both here and in Appalachia. It's gonna be bad for the climate, and it's not the way forward. From an environmental standpoint, and I think also from an economic standpoint. So that's.
Hi, I got here a little late, so I came during the Q&A. So I don't know what happened prior to that. I read Julie Kiefer's opinion piece in the Ithaca Journal, and I thought about that, and I respect Julie Kiefer a lot. I think Julie spends a lot of time processing things quite well, and we don't always agree with everybody, but she's someone I respect very much. I feel that right now that transition, we should have the coal plant continue until we can figure out certainly what we're going to do, because I'll tell you why. Cornell now has a gas plant. Cornell converted their coal to gas, and I don't see any protests up there. Okay, that's very significant that Cornell changed it to gas, because when I was at one of the discussions like we are now, and I've been to many, okay, afterwards when I talked to one of the professors, they said to me, I don't care where the gas is coming from. That's not my concern if it's fracking. So Cornell has a gas plant now. So I want to remind people of that, because by them changing to gas, that's very pivotal for then what's happening in Lansing to then become gas. Now, the reason I like what Dooley said is that the gas industry is right here on our front yard, the fracking, okay? So by allowing coal to continue, we prevent the possibility of the fracking to come into New York State. That's the way I view it, you know, and I definitely want to see more dialogue amongst the community about this. So I feel that if we don't keep the coal, there are more chances that the gas will come in. Okay, and I'm wondering whether Dooley was also thinking that as well. Now, do I like coal? Absolutely not. But we also have to look at, you know, our alternatives aren't really, I don't think they're as, right this moment, I don't think alternatives are there to fuel all of New York State. I could be wrong. But anyway, what I wanted to say is I'm thinking in the same way that Dooley is thinking, that possibly maybe we can keep coal a little bit longer, not very long, but a little bit longer until we can figure this thing out and to keep the fracking out of New York State.
So, Faye, I can talk to you afterwards and fill you in on what the presentation was, but just sort of keeping coal right now is not an option facing us. We either have transmission upgrades where the power that is, it's not, I mean, some of it may, a small amount may be coming from natural gas, but there's enough power in New York State to take the coal plant offline, not convert it to natural gas, and we'll be fine. Or we convert it to natural gas. Those are the two options facing us. So the coal is a third option, and I don't think it's the third option we want to be advocating for. If we wanted to advocate for a third option, we would advocate for renewables that could be, you know, indefinitely in the long term. So I can talk to you more about this afterwards, but.
We want to keep the fracking at bay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
they're at our front yard right now.
Yeah.
And I feel if we get rid of the coal plant, that there's good chance that the gas company is going to come in. That's just my feeling for it. It doesn't mean that I like coal. It doesn't mean that I don't feel for people suffering with the coal.
Faye makes very good points that I agree with, and I think the Cornell plant sort of snuck in just before we were paying attention, and that I mean I think we've heard a theme that let's figure something else out. I just didn't want to leave tonight without mentioning demand response, because it's one of the things that was in the Sierra Club report, and from my read of the docket, the Nucor steel plant. So distributed power is good for heating our houses, powering our houses, and the kinds of things that we use residentially. But I own a car, and you know, I believe that we should be manufacturing things in America, and we, you know, I do want us to figure out how to be able to do that. And about a third of this power, at least a third of this power, as I read it, is for the Nucor steel plant in Auburn. And so I would like to see us talk about demand response, not just residentially, that we should all rein in our use at peak times, but what is the potential for having the plant close down in the hot afternoons of the summer at the peak times that will save over 100 megawatts, and you know, and working at night. So could something be worked out there?
We should have more information on that in a few weeks, which is not a satisfying answer right now, I apologize, but demand response was a part of the Sierra Club's official statement, and it is a part of our independent consultant's suggestions. I cannot speak for Nucor Company, but I think that they would be open to having a conversation about it, and I hope to have more information for you in a few weeks on that, and I will personally follow up with you.
So what Martha was saying earlier, and what Faye says sort of hits a little bit the same thing. I'm still unclear about whether the transmission lines would be needed no matter what. I mean, I have the impression they're needed no matter what. And so if that's the case, I don't see the downside of going for the transmission lines and shutting the plant down. And then hopefully eventually repowering the plant with renewables and doing things like that. But if we're going to need those transmission lines, even when we go totally to local renewable energy resources, then we should just do it and get the plant offline. But I'm just not sure if that's really the case.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the case. I think that right now, the idea of keeping coal online, that it's not part of the discussion, what we can do is we can have these transmission lines. We keep natural gas at bay locally. We stop natural gas infrastructure from going in, and we also stop, we make it easier for renewables to come online. So I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, but is it the case that no matter what, we need the transmission line?
Yeah,
That's the conclusion.
So yeah,
That's available.
there's 2 transmission lines upgrades being proposed. Well, like actually one is like a new, I think I'm not sure the exact specificities. The report is that one of those transmission lines will have to be done anyway, and the other line, I think probably it's the same situation. There's not like as much clear evidence, but really I think there's NYSEG workers who've like come forward in the public comments, and I mentioned this, who say that the transmission upgrades have been considered since the like early 90s or something. So there's transmission upgrades have to happen just for the electrical grid.
I'm concerned that there's so few people here, and I read about it yesterday's paper, but I didn't receive any emails at all, and I'm on all these environmental emails. So my request is, please send out lots of emails about the meeting on the 29th. And Carol, when you spoke at the power plant a few weeks ago, you emphasized the importance of our coming to the county legislature's meeting. Could you tell us about that when we go the first of the month or something?
We're just moving, so if you've been to the legislature before, you need to come to a new place. It is the old courthouse, which is now called the Daniel Tompkins Courthouse, after the person that Tompkins County was named after. It is off of DeWitt Park, between the 2 churches. There's an older building, and the entrance, it looks like a church, yes. And you go upstairs. There's an elevator if you need it. And it's 5:30 p.m. the first and third Tuesdays of the month. And the public comment section is at the beginning of the meeting. So I do encourage you to come. I don't right now see this legislature getting out in front of this. There are a few of us.
Any last questions? To the few of us who haven't wilted in the heat yet.
This wonderful creative woman has fabulous posters.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I do. That I need to get one to your store. Yeah, so Sam, thank you, and Jen, thank you for making the trip. This has been a very informative and at sometimes heated discussion on a very heated day, so it's sort of fitting, I guess. And no, this was really very, very good, and it's been quite impressive, the work that you've done to get information out to us, Sam, so thanks. And Jen, thank you for your involvement with this too.